the pioneers in this space. With that, we are Mr. Neiffer. We're a little late, but we're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jason Neiffer, Neiffer, and I'm the Executive Director of Montana Digital Academy. And joining me today are two of my amazing colleagues. This is Mike Agostinelli, Agostinelli. He is our Assistant Director and Curriculum Director. And joining us via Zoom today is Caitlin Byers, Byers, who's one of our student support and content specialists. And first and foremost, thank you for the invitation to talk about what I think is one of the most important undercovered topics in any form of education, which is the emergence of generative artificial intelligence. And I know we are in the worst spot ever for attention. We're running late, we're before lunch, but we're going to keep this snapping along, and also we're going to try to keep this very visual as well, because I know your stomachs are rumbling, and I know you've already been through an intensive discussion this morning. So, to give you a quick preview, this presentation's in 4 acts today. The first one is a quick demo of generative artificial intelligence. And my guess is that some of you have had time to play with these tools and some of you have not. And the bottom line is, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information at the end of my advice on how to get started in these tools, until you use them, the descriptions that exist with everyone talking about this just don't understand how powerful this technology is. Our second point today will be related to shifts in schools and what we think schools are going to need to think about in order to embrace and not push against something that's happening very, very quickly and very, very dramatically. Third today, we will talk a little bit about what this does for teachers and teaching, and in particular, we think that artificial intelligence could provide extraordinary tools for instructors to implement some of the ideas that have already been spoken about today. And finally, we want to bring it home to Montana and talk to you a little bit about what's going on right now in both schools and organizations across the state. So before we get started, I want to focus on the image that's on my cover slide here. And here's the full part of this image. And this image, which has a vague scientific future school element to it, this image was not drawn. It was not created with Photoshop. It was not pencil-driven. There was no drafts of it. This image was generated by artificial intelligence. And in fact, I used a tool called Midjourney, widely considered to be the best-in-class tool for this purpose. And I just didn't create this image, I created others, but I used a form of a code, kind of like coding in a computer science sense, but it's natural language. And so what I asked Midjourney to do was to imagine a futuristic classroom full of engaged students that are using smartphones, laptop computers, desktop computers, and VR headsets, where an AI bot is the teacher in the style of 1960s science fiction imagery. And what it produced was, of course, this image, but also a wide variety of other images. And just to give you a quick tour through them, it provided this image for me, which is also vaguely that futuristic look at a classroom. It also created this image for me, which is also a future look at a classroom. You'll notice a theme here. The Midjourney seems to think the future will include large glass orbs everywhere in classrooms as well. This image, which is similar, that one's a little creepier. By the way, all these tools can generate an awful lot of creepy, as we'll talk about a little bit later. This image is very similar to that. And then more glass orbs, because that seems to dominate the discussion with these types of images, another glass orb. I also wanted something that was less looking like it was generated by an artist, but instead was generated to make a photograph. And so I changed the prompt a little bit, and using some information I picked up from the internet, I actually asked it to mimic a Canon camera with some very specific subdirections, and it created images that are vaguely photographic. And so this image is an example of that. Looks a little off than a photograph, but still is close to photography. This image is much more close to photography, and actually a very clear image of what that might look like. At first glance, and probably a second and third glance, it probably would be taken as a photograph. This image is also very similar with the idea that it's a photograph that was created by this. And again, the whole notion here, these weren't photographs that were taken or even composed using modern-day image devices and programs. Instead, these were generated from scratch. So we have a lot of images in our presentation today that are precisely generated images. We want to show off that technology, but we also think it's important that we start thinking about how to talk about these tool uses in any context, but I think it's especially important in education. So I made a very generic graphic in Canva that says generated with AI, and in every image in our presentation today that was generated, full disclosure, we're showing you it's a generated image. And technology groups are trying to figure out a way to do this so that you know any image is generated. There's a lot of discussion going on in the technology industry to make this happen, but this is our little contribution to that discussion. So before I get into the quick demos here, I want to give you a little bit of context, and part of it is talking about the year 2023, and I don't need to discuss this with anyone in this room because he went through a long session that discussed many different topics in education. Many of those same topics were being discussed nationally and in classrooms and in school board meetings and in PTA meetings across the United States, which is one of the reasons why I think generative artificial intelligence boiled a little bit underneath the surface, not just of education, although certainly in education, but everywhere else. And I have some evidence of that. Obviously, lots of headlines dominated during this time. ChatGPT is amazing, it's weird, it's awesome, it's brilliant. It was winning prizes at art contests, which is certainly a new phenomenon for sure. But even ChatGPT itself wasn't really noticed by the larger internet searches until January 2023, even though the version that caused all the hubbub amongst those interested in this technology, it was released in November 2022. And in fact, I was an early user of that technology because all my nerdy friends from high school, computer engineers and the like, texted me that have you been in the new ChatGPT? And I'm like, what's ChatGPT? And then I signed up for it and started playing with it and knew immediately this was nothing like we had seen before. And to give you a little sense of my background, I'm in 27 years into my education career in Montana. My first 13 years, I was a social studies teacher at Capitol High School here in Helena, briefly taught also at Great Falls High School. And when I started teaching in 1997 was the first year there was wired internet available in every classroom in the Helena School District. And I was considered to be quite the advanced teacher because I had my magical PowerPoints available. And a lot of people talked about how technology would change everything, and it has changed a lot for sure, and I work at a distance learning program, right? But I also want you to know that I tend to be a little ho-hum when people say this changes everything, because I've seen an awful lot of things that were supposed to change everything, and relatively few of them did. And so when I say that this is going to change some things, I believe that I have some perspective to say rarely does it, and I think this stuff is going to blow an awful lot of things up. I do also want to note that this technology itself is not new. It's not a 2022 phenomenon. And in fact, many of the tools you are using on your cell phone and your laptop have integrated machine learning or artificial intelligence for really years. All these articles I'm going to show you in quick succession seem like they're from like June 2023, but they're older than that. The CSO article about the sudden growth of AI companies is from 2018. This article from the New York Times about the great AI awakening, which also sounds like 2023, happens to be from 2016. And this article about the AI resurgence also dated going back to 2015. And the idea here is that, yes, these tools seem to be getting a lot of oxygen right now, but this has been boiling under the surface for a long, long time. And in fact, if you go back to the days where, by the way, real image for the first time in this presentation, the 1950s and 60s, where computers were the size of rooms, computer scientists were theorizing about thinking machines, right, and what they could do. And in fact, even the chatbot is not something that is new. Going back to the late 1970s, there was a computer program called ELIZA, which was supposed to be a psychological counseling bot, where you talk to it and would give you counseling information back. Now, let me be really clear about something. This is pretty low-level counseling. You say something, and then it says something like, how do you feel about that? Which is not really counseling, right? And then occasionally it will say, talk more about that, as opposed to giving you any sort of real insight. But this has been around longer than the internet, for sure, and certainly a part of this process. Now, I want to talk about the term artificial intelligence for just a moment, because that's the term we keep throwing around. And if you get a serious computer scientist in the room, they will explain to you that this is not artificial intelligence. And in fact, they prefer we don't use that term and instead talk about generative artificial intelligence. And what a lot of folks would tell you is that these machines aren't really thinking, and that's probably true according to some scholars and experts, but I think you'd have a really hard time telling based on your interaction with these particular platforms, because they seem like they're thinking and they act in a way that suggests it's processing information in a human-like level. And the term that is very prominent now, which you'll probably hear a lot about, and we'll refer to it a couple times today, is something referred to as a large language model, or LLM. And I'm going to give you the most basic of description. My scholarly efforts are all in educational technology, also humanities education, so I am not an expert in this particular explanation, but I have vetted this with computer science types, and they nod vaguely, so I'm going to go with that being pretty close. But imagine for a moment you read one book, right? A phenomenon we've all experienced, and if you read one book, you can sometimes regurgitate some of that information. Maybe you change some of the tone, maybe you use different wording, maybe you use similar wording, but after reading one book on one subject, you have some expertise that you can then say back to someone else or write about. And in fact, scholars and those that are trying to get a wide perspective may read 10 books on a subject, or 50 books, or 100 books on a subject. But imagine for a moment that you're not reading one book, you're reading 1,000 books, or 10,000 books, or 100,000 books, or, in the case of the largest language models, every book that's ever been published ever, right? That is what a large language model is. And even though most of these models are a little bit in the dark what they were trained on, and I'm sure you've read the headlines where everyone is suing many of these companies now, everyone from the comedian Sarah Silverman to the New York Times believes they should be compensated for using their data for training AI. Still, a lot of these models have seen everything. They've read the internet, right, from beginning to end, and they're able to then recall that information, not necessarily word for word, but use that to inform its answers when it's answering back to you. One takeaway I want you to have from today's presentation is this is not a Google search, and everyone that tries to make it into a Google search doesn't really understand how really radically different this technology is from anything we've seen before. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick demos here. This is ChatGPT, right? It's the one we talk about. Oftentimes we will sub in the name ChatGPT as the technology, even though there are hundreds of services available that rely on different models. It kind of looks like a Google search, as it turns out. But in this particular case, I'm going to start off with a very simple quandary. And that quandary is, please write a history of the causes of World War I. And the reason why I tend to go to things like this is because I taught in a history classroom for 13 years. So I can vet this stuff pretty easily without looking it up. And if I look at its answer, it's vaguely around what I would teach in either a world history context, or European history context, or an American history context when talking about what caused World War I. You can do that on the internet, by the way. You can just go causes of World War I, and probably the first 20 pages of Google would provide you these answers. But this is not it doesn't refer to anything. It doesn't involve any scholars. It's just generated for scratch. If you go and ask the same platform the same question 20 minutes later, it's probably going to give you the same general answer, but not word for word the same answer, because it's generating the answer every time from scratch. But that's not what makes this interesting. Now let's ask some sub-questions. I'd like it now to turn that same information into an outline. Well, Google won't do that for you, right? But it rewrites the information in a different kind of format. This time it's an outline. Next, I'm going to ask it to convert that original text into Swedish, because apparently I need some Swedish history involved today. And at the click of a button, it is able to produce Swedish. Now, the smaller the language group, the less likely it's able to do this legitimately, because if it doesn't have as much information to train on, it can't do that, right? But for larger languages, and Swedish certainly qualifies here, it's able to do that pretty quickly. But you're also not bound to reality either. In this case, I'm going to ask it to rewrite this text, but this time into Pig Latin, which is not a language at all. And in fact, very easily and in just seconds, we now have the history of the causes of World War I in Pig Latin. And again, if you need any evidence of this, it's not a Google search, right? This is something very different. And then I can ask it other ridiculous questions, things like, I'd like you now to put this into Morse code, which I don't know why you would need Morse code if you have access to a large language model, because technology is working apparently. But this is one that it's a little hit or miss on, right? Here, it's now just taking the primary cause headings and turning it into Morse code, right? But I want to show you an example from a couple months ago where I asked a different model called Claude to do this, and it started off in Morse code, and then it hiccuped, and because I'd asked about Pig Latin earlier, it moved back into Pig Latin. So it's not as consistent as you might think it is, and sometimes it will just refuse to do things. And weirdly, and this is really strange, weirdly sometimes you can talk it out of its own rules or tell it to do something, or it might say, I don't want to do that for you, and you have to kind of charm your way to having the large language model do that for you, okay? This is another example of a kind of a bigger process here. I'm going to now ask it to write a history of the causes of World War I, but aimed at a younger reader, right, which it's able to do. In this case, it's a 7th grade reader, so the text is less complex and the vocabulary is lower. I'm also going to now say, great, take that text and write a glossary for me of all the terms that a 7th grader might find challenging. It does that without effort. And then I'm going to ask it now to do it in exceptionally smug and high-level vocabulary. And it's able to create kind of a smug version of the causes of the history of World War I with exceptionally smug vocabulary. And then this one is very different in that I'm now asking it to write a text about the causes of World War I, but I'm going to ask it from the vantage point of Russian history and Russian point of view. And it's able to do that pretty easily as well. And that's something that is very different because that's a higher level learning piece. That's not factual recall. It's looking at other points of view and other resources to be able to do that. You'd have a hard time finding that on even the first 50 pages of Google. You could piece it together, but the fact that it's able to do this and looking at it, it looks like a pretty legitimate view of that. I think that's an extraordinary piece of information as well. And because the rule is if it has lots of information, it could generate information pretty accurately. It has relatively little information. It does it inaccurately. I'm going to throw myself under the bus because I'm more on the side of little information on the internet as opposed to lots of information on the internet. I'm now going to ask this large language model to write a biography of Jason Neiffer. And unfortunately, as of September 2021, I am not important enough to generate a real biography. And it apologizes. I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are. Maybe if you could be more important, then I can create a biography for you. Now, interestingly enough, I go to another prominent model. This is Claude, and I ask it to do the same thing. And this is where things get a little weird. It also apologizes and says, I don't have enough biographical information, but I'm going to take a shot. Jason Neiffer is an American computer scientist, false, known for his work in artificial intelligence, false, born in 1975, false, in California, false. Neiffer showed an early interest in technology and programming, okay, guilty. He studied computer science at MIT, false, although I did study at Carroll, the MIT of Helena, Montana, so I guess I have that going for me. Graduating in 1997, also true. After college, Neiffer worked at several tech companies, false, in Silicon Valley, false, 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 false. And at the end, it says that I live in San Francisco, false, with his wife, true, and my 2 children, false. So, again, right, little information, but in this case, it just said, I don't care, right? I'm just going to jump right into the fray and call it good. Now, if I pull back in a recent version of ChatGPT, it can surf the internet, and it does pick out some web pages and create a relatively accurate biography for me, although what I would also tell you is it sounds like my mom wrote it. Dr. Jason Neiffer is a prominent figure in the field of educational technology and online learning. He's currently the executive director of the Montana and all this stuff that I've supposedly done. Most of that, from a factual standpoint, is accurate, but it does shine up my biography just a little bit. And it's easy to put in ChatGPT as a potential sub here, right, that it's all generative artificial intelligence ChatGPT, but there's literally hundreds of models available. This is a recent list. A lot of the tools that say they are AI just plug in ChatGPT, right? Like that's certainly a part of this process. But I also want you to know that it can do an awful lot of things beyond generating text. It can create words, it can create pictures, it can create music from scratch, it can create video from scratch, and you can also give it your own data and it will analyze all of the above, right? Which is really wild that machine learning can be used to analyze everything from a photo you take to your photograph to an entire novel that you upload to it. And to give you a quick demo on the image part of this, I like Midjourney because it's pretty interesting and very powerful. I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples here of generated images. This is one I stole from the internet. This is Barbie and Oppenheimer, the cultural phenomenon known as Barbieheimer from earlier in 2023. They're in a desert witnessing a nuclear explosion, pink mushroom clouds on the horizon, cinematic in the style of Wes Anderson. If you know who Wes Anderson is, you will recognize what I'm about to show you. And it generated this image, which looks like a Wes Anderson movie style image of Barbie and Oppenheimer looking into the distance at a pink mushroom cloud. Okay? Let me now put this to maybe make it a little more real. I really stay away from current event generation for obvious reasons, but again, going back into my bag of tricks as a history teacher, Teddy Roosevelt as president of the United States. And let's be clear, you can find lots of images on the internet of Teddy Roosevelt, right? And I'm sure that all of you conjured up an image of Teddy Roosevelt when I said Teddy Roosevelt. Big, bushy mustache, big outdoorsy look, very Teddy Roosevelt. But if I asked Midjourney to do this, of course it can generate 4 images of Teddy Roosevelt, no problem. And they look relatively accurate. One of them has a very modern photo mystique to it, the one on the lower left-hand side. But I'm not stuck in reality. What if I want Teddy Roosevelt to have an iPhone and making it look like he's an influencer, right, which is apparently a career now in 2024. And Teddy Roosevelt, there he is with his iPhone, right, looking at it, getting the job done, apparently very interested in his current notifications. This is one that's more recent. I created this one earlier this month, and it's even that much better as these models have picked up some of the clues. What if I want Teddy Roosevelt as the 5th Beatle? What does that look like? And sure enough, it creates 4 images that vaguely suggest that Mr. Roosevelt was part of the Fab, what I'm going to call 5 at this point. What if I get even more ridiculous? I want Teddy Roosevelt to be in a fist fight with Vladimir Putin. Well, this is where it hiccups just a little bit, right? This is, he starts fighting with a bear, right? And I don't really see a lot of Putin-esque images in this particular piece, but the bear shows up. Now, is the bear because Russia, or is the bear because Teddy Roosevelt, because he was known, or the namesake of the teddy bear? I don't really know, but I have a little more evidence of this, because when I ask it to have Jimmy Fallon interview Teddy Roosevelt on The Tonight Show, that bear shows back up again. So I'm assuming this is more of a Teddy Roosevelt reference than anything else. Okay? And then, again, the ridiculous to the sublime, Teddy Roosevelt and Vladimir Putin in a limbo contest. No limbo poll, but at least you can recognize a clear Vladimir Putin in this particular set of ridiculous images. And again, lots of information, great results, little information, little results. You can find my image on the internet, but it's apparently not enough, because when I ask for a generation of me speaking to a group of space aliens, it nails the space aliens. It's not even close on me, right? It's 100 pounds, a head of hair, and a mustache away from being close to me. So that is part of the process here of these tools being able to generate images. And if I want to create a Harry Truman Lego man, I can do that relatively easily. If I want to create Speaker of the House paper dolls, then it creates for me Speaker of the House paper dolls, although not the recent speakers of the House, certainly those of the past. And if I ask it to create brutal leaders in history trading cards, it's able to conjure that in just seconds. And again, my rule that I don't touch modern politics, this is about as new as I'm going to get. But imagine for a moment that Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich are singing together on American Idol, then you can then have Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton singing together on American Idol. And again, no pushback, no, that's ridiculous. No, at no point did Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich join up for a rousing chorus of Islands in the Stream. Instead, it just will generate the image for you, no questions asked. Okay? By the way, this technology is moving very quickly. To give you a sense of this, Midjourney, March 2022, Midjourney, March 2023. The prompt is Obama and Trump playing one-on-one basketball. The image on the left looks like a ridiculous 70s progressive rock album. The one on the right looks like a pretty clear photo of what that event might look like. This image, top to bottom, same prompt, April 2022 versus April 2023. I am not immune to this either. Late 2022, I jumped in on the AI picture generation thing. You could see here, the full disclosure, the bottom two are my dog and not me. But if I put in 15 of my photos and it created all these photos of me, Jason is Kenny Rogers, Jason is astronaut, Jason is Father Time. But these are very cartoony, right? But if you go 1 year later, this is another trend on the internet called AI yearbook, where celebrities were putting in 15 of their images and creating high school photos. This looks kind of like what I looked like in high school, as it turns out. Some different things than I was actually doing in high school, but still. And if you look at an actual photo of me my senior year in high school, it nails some of the real basics here, right? Although, as my wife likes to point out, when she sees this ridiculous photo, were you trying to get on The Apprentice? What was the deal with that photograph? But you get the idea. This technology is moving really quickly, right? And that's the other takeaway I want you to get. Is this technology is moving very fast, okay? So I have a very brief piece, then I'm going to hand it over to Mike. Does this impact teaching and learning? Well, I think it's obvious that it does, right? But I want to give a couple of specifics on this. The first one is there was a study in March 2023 by OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, along with the University of Pennsylvania. And this is a wild graph. I would encourage you to dig into this one later. But it gave 3 versions of this technology a series of tests. Everything from the LSAT to the GRE to a sommelier test, if you can imagine that. And to be clear, there is no taste to GPT thing going yet. This is just based on factual information. And the November 2022 version was able to pass most of those tests. The March 2023 version was able to pass almost all the tests with high scores, and they gave it what is called vision, which is the ability for the AI model to look at stuff. So instead of typing the questions in, they just uploaded the actual tests, and it passed almost all of those, including almost all advanced placement tests. Interestingly enough, the 2 tests it was not able to pass under any model, AP Language and Composition, AP Literature and Composition, the writing tests, right? Which is interesting because these technologies are so well attuned to this notion of writing responses, right? And yet, as of middle of 2023, they weren't able to pass those AP tests. And there's 1,000 pieces of evidence of this, but there will be tons of jobs that have never been exposed to a technological challenge that will suddenly be exposed to a technological challenge. Survey researchers, writers, animal scientists, which I'm not sure if I quite understand that one, tax preparers, correspondence clerk, blockchain engineers, court reporters, proofreaders. And then I would also note for the record that this technology is everywhere now, and our students have this in their hands whether we give it to them or not. This is Google Docs that has a fun button on there that says Help Me Write. It will also write it for you if you wish. That's available to any personal Google Docs account. This is Copilot, formerly Microsoft Bing, that uses ChatGPT. It can write things from scratch. This is Canva, which is by far the most popular image and document generation suite. It's revolutionized a lot of classrooms because of how easy it is to use. You press /, you type in a topic, and it will write 5 paragraphs on why teachers should not fear AI. It will just generate it. You press another button, and it will then turn that into a presentation. This presentation isn't going to win any awards, but it's still a presentation, right? It created automatically with just the click of the button. This is Copilot on an iPhone, right? In this case, I said I was scared to testify in front of you and ask it for advice. It told me that this is a great way to be a part of your community. I was like, well, thank you, ChatGPT. And then this is Snapchat AI, right? Snapchat in the pockets of most everyone above the age of 13 to age 30. It now has an AI bot. You can also pay $3 a month and get its advanced AI bot, which does also very cool things. And in this particular case, the McKinsey Global Institute, which these are not folks that make predictions that are out there. They are pretty straight and narrow on pieces. They have revised a lot of their predictions about how this will impact work. And with generative AI added to the picture, 30% of hours worked today could be automated with generative artificial intelligence by 2030. Okay? So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mike now. It's going to talk about what we think this needs to look like in schools.
Thanks, Jason. So as we start to look about all this information and how it impacts schools, we have 4 what we're calling big nudges that schools need to be thinking about as we move forward. And the first is around this notion, you may have heard of it, the slow teaching movement or the small teaching movement. And really what that gets at its essence is depth versus breadth, right? So if we, in our instructional models, are only scratching the surface of any concept along the learning pathway, really with AI in the picture, we're doing a disservice to our students. Many would argue that's been a problem for a long time, and what we really need is deeper understanding of concepts. If we look at the hierarchy of learning, we need to think about that as well, too. But that becomes increasingly important, and AI is going to force the issue here for sure. The second is teaching and learning with why, right? And what we're talking about here is being transparent with students about what they're learning, right? So this has been best teaching practice for years, but putting objectives on the board, having a notion of it's okay to ask, why am I learning this thing, right? And getting context, because by having students having context of why they're learning, that's one of the ways that we can have students invest actually in understanding what it is that they're learning about and what it's leading to, right? The third is media and data literacy, and our standards include this. In the state of Montana, this has been something that, again, is not new, but it's as important as ever, right? Being able to vet sources, understand where information is coming from, being able to understand that making a decision based upon one source, probably not the best idea, but rather taking a variety of sources and opinions to form an educated decision or pathway forward is a much more I think, better way to approach that. But then there's this another level. Jason described the training of AI models on this data, right? One of the big questions ahead of us that students, adults, everyone needs to be asking is when we use an AI tool, what is the data that it's being trained upon, right? Because it's going to spit out information with confidence like, hey, this is the answer. But if it's trained on just a subset of information and presented as fact, that could be a real problem. It's something that I think all levels of humans need to know moving forward and ask those questions. Jason also mentioned that's the one area where there's not a lot of transparency right now about what these models are being trained on. I think that's a question we need to be asking and helping our students understand how to find those answers. And then finally, evolving our assessment practices. And this fits in perfectly with all the discussion that happened this morning, right? This has been a thing we've needed to do for a long time. But when generative AI can pass almost every AP exam with 100% accuracy, we need to start thinking about what does assessment look like and how do we assess differently. We've had models for decades about how to do this in different ways. Project-based, right? Small, formative assessments that lead to larger end products. Here's a radical idea. How about we give students a little voice in the assessment process? Crazy, I know, but yeah, that would be actually what the research says is if the students have some buy-in and some choice in how they show their knowledge, right? The CTE field, for instance, has figured this out a long time ago, right? That the end product matters a whole lot, and if we can build towards that, we really are setting kids up for buy-in, and then also at the same time guarding against this notion, well, I'm just going to go to AI and look it up because it can get 100% on this test, right? So let's talk a little bit about some just basic structures that schools we really feel need to be thinking about and forming local policy around, right? So one of the big questions is what is the stance or what's the policy about cheating with AI, right? Because it's there, it's very possible. There's a lot of forward-thinking educators already and researchers at all levels that are starting to put out good, useful frameworks for us to start to frame the discussion for students about when is AI a good idea, when should we stay away from AI, and the why behind that, right? So this is just a basic model from Matt Miller that talks about that continuum of writing a paper, for instance, completely on your own without any AI help, to the opposite end, which is I just put a prompt into AI, it spits out a 5-paragraph essay, and I turn it in as my own work. We have to have nuanced discussions about the when and why we use AI, and we don't really feel like it can be the answer to just say, oh, don't use AI. Because as Jason just demonstrated, it's already in Google, it's already in Word, it's already in search. There is no avoiding this. It's more about educating ourselves onto how to accurately move on beyond that. Here's another very elementary-based approach that actually scales all the way through high school, which is the yes, maybe, no structure around AI. So if we embed an AI discussion into every step of the learning process, and then we have a simple prompt, yep, this is an okay time to use AI. Nope, not a good time to use AI, or maybe. And then we have a quick 3-minute discussion with the students about why. Now we have embedded learning happening with whatever context we're teaching, right? And so it's not like we're teaching AI as a separate thing, but rather it's just involved in the learning process. Another look for this is the red, yellow, green structure that we present to students in a variety of different contexts. We can do the exact same thing with AI. In this assignment, this is a green assignment. Absolutely, let's use AI to help us along the path. If it's a red assignment, no, this one's not, and here's the why behind that. So the big takeaway here is that flexible, student-centered learning is more important than ever. We've been talking about it all morning, right? AI is just forcing that conversation more and more and more. There's also a few things that we need to be careful about, I think, in schools, which is some knee-jerk reactions to this super powerful tech. The first is, oh, well, we can just do some AI detection and can punish students if they use it. Well, that sounds great, but as it turns out, there's not a tool currently on the market that has 100% accuracy in detection. Just like plagiarism detectors have always been an interesting tool, but not the end-all, be-all for identification. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have some detection software, because it can be a valuable tool, but it requires nuance for teachers, right? Like if something's flagged, great, let's have a discussion about it. Let's not use it as this hard line that, oh, you used AI, 0 on your assignment, right? The next thing that we've heard is, well, we're just going to ban any AI usage in our district. Well, that means you're literally going to turn off your computers now moving forward, right? Because it's everywhere. So I don't feel like that's a solution. Now, should there be some monitoring and some nuanced approach? Absolutely, right? But it has to be on a case-by-case basis with the tool, how old the students are, data privacy, all those pieces need to be part of it. But just a full-fledged ban, I just don't think is going to cut it. And then, of course, this idea of ignoring, AI is just a fad, it's going to go away. There's just been too much overwhelming evidence and money, I would add, billions invested in this by all the big companies and the small ones. I mean, to your point, Representative Jones, earlier this morning about Sears, the big companies, they're seeing like this is the tech that could make us irrelevant if we don't keep up. Microsoft's investing heavily, Google's investing heavily, Amazon's investing heavily because they see this as maybe the biggest threat to their business moving forward. Because of that, I think all signs point to this is here to stay and is going to keep evolving. And then finally, there has been the notion that we've seen that, oh, AI can just teach the kids now. Well, no, right? We still need, do we need to evolve? Absolutely, right? But the teacher needs to remain at the center of this, because as we've learned in this presentation, the complexities around the AI, how it works, what information it spits out, takes a lot of interpretation, right, and help. And teachers really need to be able to help navigate that learning along the way. All right, with that, the big shift here is there is no quick fixes, right? This is a complex problem that's going to take a lot of nuanced answers to fix. And with that, we're going to hand it over to...
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Caitlin Byer, who is on the Zoom call today. This is her first time in front of the legislature, and we're happy to share some of her thoughts with you today. Go ahead, Caitlin, and I'll run slides.
Great, thanks, Mike and Jason. So I'm excited to join you today, and I won't be the first person to tell you that teachers are facing increasing challenges and significant challenges and increased stress, specifically after the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing work overload, unprecedented burnout rates, teacher resignations, and vacancy challenges in school. And so I keep hearing in this room this morning this need for innovative solutions. And we think that AI can be an innovative solution for teachers, specifically because we want to keep good teachers in the classrooms, and we want to support them and make sure that while AI isn't the solution, it can be one of the solutions to alleviating part of this burden that we're increasingly placing on teachers. So there are four main categories that we want to highlight for you today. The first being adaptation and personalization. We want to be able to meet students where they are, and we've heard about some models that do that here. And this happens with AI tools in some really incredible ways. So we're talking about the ability for AI to help teachers create unique learning journeys for every student in their classroom. With less teachers in schools right now and larger class sizes, this becomes increasingly a challenge. But when you can utilize AI tools that have the ability to assess student proficiency more quickly and then customize the content that is delivered to students, you then have the ability to remediate and accelerate for students. So you're imagining competency-based learning models where you can create profiles for certain types of learners and then use AI to help a teacher generate the lesson that's going to help this student remediate content that they're not able to access just yet and accelerate for this student who's able to move more quickly. This includes things like adaptive tutoring and then also being able to curate your learning resources. So we have students in learning progressions in our classrooms who need different entry points into, say, different reading materials and content that's being presented to them, but it's really hard to adjust that on the fly for students. With AI models, you're able to feed content and text into the model and ask it to adjust the lexile or the reading level for you. So if you're in a middle school classroom with students who range from a 4th grade reading level all the way up to a 10th grade reading level, you can make immediate adjustments for those students so that every student has an entry point into the learning. Next up, one of the big time savers that AI is going to offer for educators and enhance productivity is that it's going to offer this ability for teachers to focus more time on what matters, which is this connection and relationship that we keep hearing about. So there are lots of things that happen for those of you who've been in the classroom outside of those direct instruction hours where you're face-to-face with students, and a lot of tasks and administrative tasks that pull teachers away from what is most important, which is that relationship and communication. So things like parent communications, newsletters that keep parents informed of what's going on in the classroom, that build community and help support student success. Things like lesson planning. This can be supported by AI models. Both Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace for Education are updated with AI that help to support that repetitive document creation that's happening, especially as so many more of our learning materials are digitized. Not only that, but there's this ability for AI models to help us with assessment development. So if you've ever had to come up with a multiple choice question so that you could assess whether or not a student understood the content, you know how challenging it can be to develop a reliable quiz bank, for example. AI can support this and help streamline this process for teachers so that they can spend more time doing what matters. Some other like really quick and interesting applications is that AI's vision abilities can allow a teacher to capture notes that they've handwritten on, say, like a classroom whiteboard or on a sheet of paper, and then convert that to text or a graphic that they can hand out later to students so that everybody's included, and students who may not be as proficient note takers still are able to capture and receive benefit from that information. Another really quick one that I find to be super helpful are tools for content review. Teachers spend a lot of time trying to incorporate different modalities into their learning plans, and things like YouTube videos and podcasts can be incredibly time consuming to scrub through and make sure that the content meets the learning standards. There are extensions for your browser now that will allow you to generate a transcript of a YouTube video or a podcast and then create a summary and highlight any of the learning objectives that are there. So you can just imagine, for any of you who've spent any time doing that, the amazing time-saving capacity there. Next up, we have data analysis. Teachers are constantly grabbing different data points and have to take the time to process and understand what all of those data points from test scores, from grades, from attendance, all of these different pieces. So AI's ability to process huge amounts of data can highlight trends and patterns in student performance, which is going to aid teachers in implementing any sort of customized teaching strategy. So these insights become more readily available because AI tools are able to process through the information faster, and more data points are being considered. This also, it gives the opportunity for more real-time feedback so that decisions can be made when it matters most. When the student is in front of you, or the next time they run into this content, it can be presented in a way that may make more sense to them based on where they are in their learning pattern. You can see where all of these are related. AI also has incredible predictive powers. So when a trend is recognized, a teacher can use AI tools to be able to say, oh, if we continue in this fashion, if this standard or this objective does not continue to be met by this student in this way, I can see where down the road this is going to lead to problems with X, Y, and Z content, standard, or objective. And it's this ability to be able to highlight that so that learning gaps, as opposed to being widened, can be addressed earlier with that truly actionable data that AI is able to help us process through more quickly. And then finally, the creativity that is inherent that you've seen through the slides that Dr. Neiffer presented to us it's just pretty mind-blowing. This image is AI generated, and wow, if that is not some splendor for you. Talk about a visually rich resource. The ability for AI through tools like Canva Magic Write to revolutionize lesson planning are just, it's kind of unbelievable to think about the customized images that you could generate for your students to help with engagement and imagination. The ability to generate an image like this is far beyond my ability. However, I was able to use an AI tool, this is from Dolly in ChatGPT, to generate an image that is engaging without the technical expertise or the artistic ability to be able to supplement these slides today. It can also really be a tool for dynamic instruction, being able to generate content and images, music, on the fly to be able to supplement and engage with who your students are in the room right now, and give teachers an easier way to be able to do that. I can imagine just relieving a huge amount of the burden in that content creation that's inherent in teaching students how to do things. And then finally, AI can serve as a really incredible thought partner for educators and for students. I have an example of an English teacher who assigned students to develop a description, to write a description about a character from a piece of Shakespeare that they were reading at the time. She took those descriptions from her students, fed them into Adobe Firefly, which is an image generator through Adobe, and the image that was generated was handed back to the students with an understanding of, hey, this is what your description would be translated as to someone or multiple someones, in this case, or a machine. Is this what you meant? Is this what you were picturing? How can you improve your writing based on what we've seen here? So ultimately, these tools seem like they could be an amazing superpower and support to our teachers. And our takeaway here is that these tool sets and these abilities that they can enhance for teachers doesn't ever remove the teacher from the equation, but it could certainly help with the sometimes overwhelming aspects of the job that's in front of them.
Great. Thank you very much, Caitlin. Okay, so taking this down to a landing, we want to make a local focus here for a moment and talk a little bit about initiatives that are going on in Montana. And before we do that, I want to kind of give you what our stance on this is. Obviously, we're doing a lot thinking about this, playing with these tools, pushing them into our professional context. But I want to also tell you that there are enormous risks with just going all in on all AI all the time. This is a list that is probably not even comprehensive of all the things that could go wrong if we decide that AI, we're going to plug it in with no thought to it. But at the same time, if we ignore AI, we could be diminishing the ultimate impact of education to truly help students make their dreams come true and teach what they need to learn in a future dominated by this technology. So our stance on this is something that we're now calling AI centrism, that we have to look at, evaluate, adopt, modify, change, shift as much as possible, but be very mindful of the fact that this technology is so new, moving so quickly, and is so extraordinary that we can't make big, broad shifts in one direction or the other without constantly looking at what our values are, what we're trying to do with students, and what we want to provide for students. More specifically, MTDA is doing two things right now in the more specific realm as opposed to our larger efforts here. We're already offering an AI class for students. It was offered fall 2023. It will be offered again this spring. We'll evaluate the student response to see if we want to keep that around for next fall. We've been pushing our vendors hard to try to come up with good, vetted, protective tools for AI, and the vendor we're working with right now, we're the early pilot site for Tutor.com's writing tutor. So we're working with that with 5 of our teachers this spring, 2 social studies and 3 English teachers. We are also going to release in February, along with our partners, the Montana Federation of Public Employees, MREA, SAM, and the MTSBA, a framework for schools that was initially developed by the Michigan Virtual School that we're adapting to Montana. It will be released in February. I will send the chair a copy of this for distribution to the rest of you so you can see what we're doing here. It's already been vetted by the Montana School Board Association attorneys, so we know that it's good advice, and we're also going to integrate their model policy into this particular document. And we know we've riffed a little bit on the tractor graphic that's referred to often in the Education Committee. We did an AI version of it. Chairman Jones, please note the color of the tractors. And we want you to know that we're all working together here to try to figure this out, because we can't leave anyone behind in this. It's just happening too quickly. And to be very frank, it's the nerdy among us that are keeping a close eye on this. And speaking at my regular meeting of nerds, we want to make sure that everyone is brought along with this technology. is offering an innovation summit on this next Tuesday, where they're starting to develop policy. Higher education's also paying very close attention to this for good reason. Montana Digital Academy, along with the College of Education at the University of Montana, has been running an AI education lab every 2 weeks since October, where we pull in educators from around Montana and around the nation to just have conversations for an hour every couple of weeks to talk about this and try to develop policies and thoughts and procedures. Montana Digital Academy is also going to offer its second annual Innovation Symposium in July of this year. We call it Innovation Runs Through It. Last year we had 75 educators from 8 different states that joined us to talk about things like proficiency-based education, artificial intelligence, dual credit, blended learning, online learning. And the best conversation I was in last year was when a 3rd grade teacher and a college comp teacher were working together on blended learning, and they had the exact same concerns about their students. And those type of synergies are things we really like to do at Digital Academy. And finally, before we open ourselves for questions, I apologize. I'm going to give you homework, but I have created a document that is the "you need to play with these tools yourself" document. And if you go and type the words artificial intelligence into Google, you will quickly be underwater. So don't do that. Instead, there's a short link to this document and also a QR code if you're a QR code person. This lives on the internet. I'm going to keep it updated. I call this our Play with Artificial Intelligence for Policymakers, and I have vetted about 20 different tools that I think are worth your time. And even if you don't think AI is your thing, I think you need to know how it works from a front row standpoint so you can start thinking about the ways we need to shift policies and assumptions based on these tools, because it's nothing like you've ever seen before. There's also some great courses I linked to if you want to learn about some of the technical pieces of this. Prompting, which is kind of the program language of artificial intelligence. I've shared the best resources there. And then a couple of interesting tools that you could use in your day-to-day work for research, for summarizing YouTube videos, for also talking with yourself. As it turns out, one of my favorite things to do on the way to work in the morning on my 10-minute commute is to chat with ChatGPT, ramble on for 10 minutes, and it turns it into a list of things to do when I get to the office. And those tools itself are really quite extraordinary. So that was a lot of information in about as our time, but we're happy to answer any of your questions on this issue.
Okay, well, thank you. And as a fellow nerd that's been playing with AI since it came out, I have a subscription to several of them. I actually run Bard, Claude 2, the ProScript, ChatGPT, the Bing image creator, and I'll simultaneously upload and then combine them. So it is definitely amazing. Occasionally I'll send folks images just for my entertainment, but it is fascinating. Well, since I usually argue with Rep. Beatty about that, I'll go to there and then I'll come back to you with questions. Rep. Beatty.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. I was sitting at the nerd end of the table here, but in this particular case, I'm more of a Luddite. And I see the promise of generative AI, and thank you for the presentation you made on that, because I think it clarifies a lot of things. At the end of the day, human developed content is what is being manipulated in AI. And however, through that manipulation, I have a concern, and you expressed it, I think it was expressed earlier here as well, is what if there's a systematic exclusion of content over time? The other question is, is all human content, what human content has been excluded from the database to start with? I mean, these are practical questions. I think I certainly see this being a great educational tool, and I think that it's important that we remember this is a tool. Otherwise, the machines will suddenly come to the conclusion they don't need meat anymore, and we're all doomed. Bad joke. So I think from an educational standpoint, though, I think we need to remember that we're working on the development of young minds, of actual people capable of dealing with information. So here's a little, since my time at West Point was brought up here earlier, this is from many years ago because I've been gone many years. We had a controversy at West Point over the use of computer algebra systems in our so-called, you can tell where I'm coming from, in the required calculus courses that were being offered by the Department of Mathematics. I was in the Department of Physics. So what we ended up having from these, computer-based algebra products were physics majors who were illiterate in mathematics. So instead of doing mathematics by hand, doing algebra by hand, whereby you actually had to say x plus y equals z, I would have physics majors come to me and I'd be reading their mathematics, which is the language, right? And I have x plus y equals nothing. I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make, by the way, I lost this battle, one of many, but I think that there's something to be said about the engagement of human beings with the material and the learning of the language. In this case, it's the language of mathematics. I think you could say the same thing about the generation of papers. I think this AI sounds like a great research tool. It allows me to do a lot of research and summarize that. But somehow I have to evaluate that summary. I have to evaluate the sources. And if I were a teacher, I would have to, I guess if I'm trying to implement this, I would have to ensure that maybe that they're the right AI questions are in, so that I get both the German perspective on World War I and the French perspective on World War I, plus the sources, so that you're conscious of that. Otherwise, you're simply mindlessly accepting the analysis as being the truth. When it comes, though, to when it comes to cognitive development, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I think this is plausible, I think the process of writing actually works towards developing a child's brain. And so I think it's important that actual writing takes place, not because you get the best result. AI might give you the best result, but the AI isn't developing your brain in the same sense that my physics majors were not having their cognitive abilities built because they weren't required to actually communicate in the language of science, otherwise known as mathematics. So anyway, I guess I got engaged in this whole subject because the company I work for actually just put together a task force to look at AI, and I did see that interesting slide about that showed how number of Google searches on AI or something like that. I mean, I think there's AI is real, but there sure as hell is an awful lot of marketing going on here as well at the same time, and it's the next shiny object. I think there's an aspect of that, and I think you got to push that aside and I applaud you for getting us to the root of this. So thank you very much.
May I comment on that, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, Representative Beatty, I couldn't agree with you more. I am expert on childhood development, and you are spot on about we can't say because AI does it best, we don't need to teach that, because then we will raise a generation of soft brain kids, almost for sure, right? And we don't, look at the humanities for a moment, we don't ask students to write a paper about the Great Gatsby because we really need another 150 hot takes on the Great Gatsby, right? Those topics have been drilled to death, but we do that because it's a development of critical thinking, right? And that's where we talk about the notion of more in-depth learning as opposed to wider learning, more about process than about the product, because in the end, the most important thing about writing an essay evaluating the dropping of the atomic bombs in World War II is not because we need more takes on that, but rather students need to be wrestling with those topics, thinking about those topics, looking at different sources that make different arguments for or against, and then making an evaluative judgment, which is the crux of critical thinking. So I think you're spot on your thoughts about how this could impact learning.
Kendall?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And like you, I've been utilizing AI quite a bit, actually, in my daily life, and it's incredible. And I've definitely seen firsthand how it could potentially disrupt, education. Even I used it the other day to provide the code and teach me how to code a custom widget on my website. And I know zero about website coding. And typically, I probably would have had to go hire somebody to do that, but it provided me the code and taught me how to do that, and I could probably replicate that in the future. So I think that's very interesting. And I just want to throw out two considerations for the committee, and I have a question for you guys. I think one consideration for us as policy, or thinking about policy here, is 5 years ago we thought AI was going to disrupt the trades and the minimum wage jobs. We thought it was going to lead to a bunch of robots, so it was going to automate everything. And it turns out, now that we're actually developing AI, that it's much more poised to disrupt the high-income, high-education type of jobs like lawyers, doctors, things like that. And so I think that we need to be thinking from an education point of view about preparing kids for careers now with that in mind. And the second thing is, there's kind of two there's two schools of thought in the AI camps. There's one school of thought that thinks that we're going to be ended up developing a really, basically like a godlike AI that is like an oracle and we can ask to do anything. The other side says we're going to have tons of different AIs that are specialized in different areas. And so that's one question I had is that, in terms of your courses, a lot of these resources are geared towards helping people learn how to use AI programs, which is fantastic. But, are we thinking about helping to train teachers and educators how to build their own AIs? Could they build a World War I AI that they could use for their class for coursework? So that's my question.
Sure. Delighted to answer, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Colton. Yes, and in fact, this is super in the weeds, so I'm only going to spend 1 minute on here. Otherwise, we're never going to get out of here. But making your own AI is really the next generation of this. All these tools are amazing, but we have developed a couple of proof of concept, what are called GPTs. As of next week, you can actually sell these if you want to on the ChatGPT store or like App Store-like environment. But it's things like we've uploaded all of Montana state standards to a GPT. And so if we want to find out if a lesson or a concept is multidiscipline, in other words, if we can meet multiple standards based on one lesson, then because it's focusing only on those documents and not the wider internet, then it's able to do that without much ado. We've also, I've created the Neiffer email bot. I don't use it all that regularly, but I took 40 pages of my best written, greatest hits of all time email, stuck them in a document, uploaded it to ChatGPT, and I said, learn the way I write emails. And then every couple of days, I get an email. I said, answer that email. Tell me what you would say. And it kind of sounds like me, right? Because you can train the AIs to do whatever you want. And I think really that's the next frontier. There will always be ChatGPT, Copilot from Microsoft, Bard from Google, Claude's Anthropic tools are awesome, right? But in the end, we want it based off of the information we know that's going into it and not some kind of mindless black box that sucked up a portion of the internet that's unknown. And that notion of a GPT is really important. And we are aggressively working to train our teachers in this. And when I can report to you from the other associations working on this, they know it's coming. I've already spoken to 25 schools in Montana as of next week. I'll be up in Malta helping teachers start to envision this. And I think anyone that plays with this for more than 15 minutes understands it's going to be disruptive whether we like it or not. So we need to make sure we're thoughtful about our implementation.
Okay. So, and I see it in the field as well, too. My son is a lawyer, since people look to Mr. Mercer. And ultimately, he has purchased one of the AI generative research tools, right? And will when he's looking to put together research for a court case or whatever, it will generate in as long as you get good at the prompt, and that's the key. It answers what you ask it. It'll generate literally 14 pages of research, all with references on that case in some manner that would have taken him days to put together. Now, it's not always 100% accurate, but it puts it together and speeds that up incredibly. And I use it to look at email as well. But if I had to pick something is learning to use the tool, because I just began with ChatGPT and said, write a resume, write a reference, and I began to play with it, and I'd look up what else you could do, what you ask it, the ability to upload and have a look at images, the ability to, I don't see a lot of that out there, too. It would be nice to have there's some courses in school, but I'd love to see a 1 week or some training course for a series of adults where they actually talked about talking with the deal, so it's not so much trial and error. And then even as well as it writes, the versions, whether it's Bard or Claude, all produce different outcomes, right? For me, I'll make them all produce an outcome. I'll blend the outcome to what I like. I'll steal from some portion of all of them. I'll re-upload it. I'll blend it a second time. But this doesn't take nearly as long as you would think. And so I used to always try to have to put stuff away to proofread it. Now I just make all of them proofread it, and then I kind of select what I like from whichever one of the proofreaders. So it is fascinating. It's certainly here to stay. It's, if we ignore it, you ignore it at your peril. Senator.
Just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. You can take the fifth if you would. Your last op-ed, was it AI generated? Don't answer that.
No, I'll be honest about it. No, I will not generate it from op-ed. I will write the op-ed. I'll proofread it with the AI through several of the versions. So I always write myself. I'm not a bad writer. But it'll clean up. What I used to have to do is I used to have to do it over several days, and then I'd make my wife or somebody read it in between. So I'll write an op-ed, and then I'll try to proofread it once that day, normally in the old one. Then I'd have to wait up and to the next day to read it because somehow I was reading what I thought was there instead of what was there, right? So then I'd write it again. Then I'd give it to someone else and have them read it. So what I'll do now is I'll write it, and then I'll upload it to all four, and then I'll have them make suggestions, and I'll ask it for accuracy and grammar and conciseness, and I'll do it 2 or 3 different times, and then I'll still probably wait a day because sometimes I still don't like what's there. But no, it has changed writing. When people ask for a letter of reference now, I'll write stuff about them. I'll say, this is so-and-so, and I'll write the key points I want it to emphasize, and I'll say generate. Now, I won't necessarily like the version that's generated, but it'll be close enough that I've got just some modification time instead of flat creation from nothing time. If we do a number of buildings where government buildings work, where you've got to have the folks there now because of Homeland Security who ask questions like, are you a terrorist, which fascinates me. I wonder whoever answers yes to that stupid question. But you now have to have resumes for the people that work for you. They're probably janitors that never wrote a resume. So I'll get a bunch of information from them and say, generate a resume. Then look at it and modify it some. But it's time-saving ability. What used to take me 4 hours takes me 20 minutes. It just speeds stuff up. And in my world, I don't need to spend 3 days worth of proofreader time. I can have the machine proofread it now. Why wouldn't I? Well, I did share when talking to my son that you better get good at it because, all the paralegal folks that do research and some of that, you better get good at using it because otherwise your ability to produce research, is limited. We've used it for that. We do a lot of notes or contracts. I would say generate a note, a promissory note with these kind of conditions, and it'll generate one. And again, I don't always like the exact version it generates, but it'll beat the heck out of starting from scratch. Bill may be using it as well.
No, I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, I'm delighted to report that I just turned 60 on Sunday, and I feel like I'm aging out of needing to be this innovative because I think it is going to rock the world.
Mr. Mercer, I'm 61. Questions, thoughts, comments? And I'll share, Josh had shared that in doing his, and you can get this correct, the references you've got to put on a document when you put it out, which usually to get the format and the style correct takes ages. Go ahead and I'll let you share that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so a works cited page, getting all the formatting correct can take a while. Claude did it in about 12 seconds. So it wasn't perfect, so then you need another 4 seconds to fix what it missed the first time.
All right, Representative Beatty.
All right. Wonderful uses of AI. I certainly could use it for proofreading the stuff I write as well. But we're talking about the educational development of our children and the use of this tool here. These are different topics. Its utility for someone who actually has life experience and has been educated is one thing. It's another thing to contemplate how this is going to interact with the cognitive development of our children. And ultimately, since that'll be the next generation creating the content that goes into AI, we hopefully will create, our children will be educated in such a way that they can contribute to the human-developed content that feeds the AI that will allow me to proofread my stuff better.
And I guess in my comment to that, and we'll break as well unless someone wants to, is my thought process is I fear two tails. I fear that the classroom that says we will never even speak about AI and they ban it, because that's like saying you're going to build a house today without a hammer, because it's the tool of the future. I fear the classroom that says don't ever worry whether you can write or have any basic background. We're going to just go ask the computer to write the document for you. I think both tails are going to create failure, like so much of the stuff we do. It is the new tool, but somewhere along the way, you do have to. I couldn't have learned to write without having to write. I couldn't have learned to do math without having to do math. And so there's a balance, right, sir?
It goes back to yes, no, maybe, right? Yes, no, maybe is just a great structure to talk with kids. And if that's embedded in everything you're teaching, yes, no, maybe with AI, that develops the framework so that in the incremental learning process, that discussion about AI usage is transparent throughout, right? And it'll be yes, no, or maybe. And that gives the structure to have that conversation.
And we'd also welcome, Mr. Chairman, to the cause of AI centrism, right? That's exactly what we feel too. There's a lot of risk on both sides, but if you adopt either perspective, I think it's full of risk. But if we can keep a nice down the middle perspective on this, I think we have a shot of evolving the way we need to.
Okay, additional questions at this point? In that case, thank you, sir. That was very informative. I enjoyed that. I haven't been to a formal AI presentation except once at an NCSL. And so thank you for the effort putting this together. I look forward to seeing where it goes. With that, we will recess for 25 minutes. That's a long lunch for us. So 25-minute recess.